That first night, the silence screamed louder than my own weeping ever had. It wasn't just quiet, it was a void. A gaping hole in the fabric of my home where the soft thump of a tail against the floor should have been, where the gentle rhythm of sleeping dog breaths should have anchored me in the dark. Buster, my shadow, my furry guardian through the worst days of my life, was gone. Vanished. And the sickening realization clawed its way through the fog of grief. He hadn't just vanished. He was taken. Sold off like unwanted furniture by the very people who were supposed to be holding me up while I mourned my husband. David's brother and his wife. Family. They hovered with false sympathy, their eyes calculating, seeing my devastation not as pain to be eased, but as weakness to be exploited. They thought I was shattered, lost, easily managed. They had absolutely no clue about the secret David had left me, a hidden ace meant for exactly this kind of betrayal. And they certainly didn't understand the fury of a grieving woman pushed too far. They were about to learn. Oh, they were about to learn. Before the world tilted off its axis, my life felt sun-drenched. Ordinary in the best possible way. I'm Sadie, a graphic designer who found joy in bringing ideas to life with color and shape. My husband, David, was my counterbalance. An architect, grounded, brilliant, with a quiet strength that made me feel safe and a laugh that could dissolve any worry. We weren't chasing flashy things. Our happiness was built from simpler materials. Evenings spent tangled on the sofa watching old movies, muddy weekend hikes exploring trails just outside the city, the slow, satisfying work of renovating our small, charming house together, arguing playfully over paint swatches and tile choices. David handled the structural stuff. I obsessed over the aesthetics. It was a partnership. Easy, comfortable, complete. We had our rhythm, our inside jokes, our dreams for the future quietly stacking up like blueprints on David's desk. It wasn't just a good life. It was our life, tailor-made and precious. Buster bounded into our world about 3 years before everything changed. We'd weathered a storm, a heartbreaking miscarriage that left me feeling adrift, hollowed out. David, ever attuned to my emotional landscape, didn't just offer platitudes. He researched, he planned, and then he introduced me to a pair of soulful brown eyes belonging to a lanky, perpetually optimistic golden retriever puppy. Buster wasn't just a dog, he was prescribed hope. He became a certified therapy dog, astonishingly intuitive. He'd sense the tremors of anxiety starting deep inside me and counter them with a gentle paw on my knee or by simply leaning his solid, warm weight against my legs until the wave passed. David, who initially claimed Buster was for me, fell just as hard. Their wrestling matches in the backyard were epic, filled with joyous barking and David's booming laughter. Buster became the furry embodiment of our shared happiness, the glue in our little trio. David was always the planner, the saver. He managed our finances with a quiet diligence I admired but rarely questioned. He'd talk about contingency plans, rainy day funds. Just being prepared, Sadie, he'd say with a reassuring smile. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. The idea that the worst could actually happen, that our carefully constructed world could be obliterated overnight, felt like a theoretical problem from a distant universe. Then the universe imploded. A phone call. An accident. A structural collapse at a new building site David was inspecting. He was gone. Easily. The words didn't compute. The world turned to static, the color draining from everything, leaving only a dull, gray ache. Breathing felt optional. Moving felt impossible. The days that followed were a suffocating parade of hushed voices, pitying eyes, and food I couldn't taste. Through it all, Buster was my constant. When I crumpled onto the floor, unable to stand, he was there, licking the tears from my face, his presence a silent promise that I wasn't entirely alone. He missed David too. I saw it in the way he'd whine softly at the door when David's car should have pulled in, the way he'd rest his head on David's favorite armchair, waiting. David's brother Mark and his wife Linda descended almost before the dust settled. Mark, who David always described with a mixture of affection and exasperation. The charming salesman type, always looking for an angle. Linda, his wife, meticulously put together, her condolences delivered with perfect posture and an air of practiced solemnity. In the depths of my shock, I clung to the idea of family. They swept in, taking over arrangements, fielding endless calls, filling the house with a nervous energy that felt jarringly different from David's calm presence. "We've got you, Sadie," Mark insisted, his hand lingering a bit too long on my shoulder. "Anything you need." David would have wanted us to step up. Linda nodded, her eyes darting around our living room, taking inventory while murmuring sympathetic clichés. They moved into our guest room, insisting I shouldn't be alone, that they would handle the difficult practicalities. It felt intrusive, like my grief wasn't allowed its own space, but I told myself I was being uncharitable, numb. Buster, however, didn't share my confusion. He seemed instantly wary of them, especially Mark. A low growl would sometimes rumble in his chest when Mark got too close, and he'd deliberately position himself between me and them on the sofa. I dismissed it as stress, the poor dog confused by the sudden influx of strangers and the absence of his master. I didn't recognize it then, but Buster sensed the rot beneath the surface long before I did. The foundation of my life was gone, and predators were already circling the ruins. In the heavy weeks after the funeral, Mark and Linda's help began to feel less like support and more like an occupation. Their temporary stay stretched indefinitely. Linda's tidying became a constant reshuffling of my life. My mail opened to help sort things, my pantry reorganized for efficiency, my personal items subtly shifted or questioned. "Are you sure you still need this, dear?" she'd ask, holding up one of David's old sweatshirts I kept on the armchair. Her smile was constant, but it felt brittle, painted on. Mark, meanwhile, shifted his focus to finances with unnerving speed. "Sadie, we really need to get a handle on David's estate," he'd say, spreading papers on the dining table. "Insurance, investments, it can be complicated. Let me take the burden off your shoulders." He wasn't asking, he was asserting control. I felt a prickle of warning. David had always kept his business dealings somewhat separate from Mark, despite the family connection in Mark's company. Why the sudden intense interest now? I gave vague answers, pleaded exhaustion, kept key documents locked away. His frustration was palpable, though quickly masked by concern. The talk about Buster started insidiously. "He really is a big presence, isn't he?" Linda would comment, watching Buster pad softly behind me. "Shits quite a bit too. Must be hard keeping up with it all right now." Then Mark more directly, "Sadie, a dog like Buster requires a lot of attention. Maybe just while you're finding your feet, a quieter home might be better for him? Less stress for everyone." Less stress? Buster was my stress relief. He was the warm living link to David, to our happy life. The suggestion felt obscene. "Absolutely not," I stated, my voice sharper than I intended. "Buster is staying here. With me. End of discussion." Mark raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, just thinking of you." But his eyes held a cold calculation that chilled me. "They started insisting on walking him more often to give you peace and quiet, Sadie." I relented, sometimes needing the solitude, but I felt guilty. Buster often came back subdued, sometimes panting heavily as if he'd been run ragged. Once I noticed a small scratch on his nose. Mark brushed it off. Got a bit too friendly with a thorny bush at the park. His explanations always felt slightly off, too quick, too smooth. Strange things kept happening. Little things that felt wrong. A specific perfume of Linda's suddenly lingering in David's study, a room she had no reason to be in. Overhearing Mark on the phone, his voice hushed, mentioning logistics and transport. When I walked in, he hung up abruptly, claiming it was a work call. Neighbors mentioned seeing an unfamiliar white van parked on our street several times, usually when Mark was supposedly walking Buster. When I asked him, he feigned ignorance. "Deliveries, probably. People order everything online these days." Doubt twisted inside me. Was I losing my mind? Was grief making me see shadows everywhere? Or were these tiny inconsistencies adding up to something truly sinister? I started documenting things in a hidden notebook. Dates, times, weird comments, the van sightings. A part of me felt ridiculous, paranoid. But another part, a primal instinct for self-preservation, screamed that I needed to pay attention. The air in my own home grew thick with unspoken tensions, and the lock on my bedroom door became a nightly ritual. The situation careened from uneasy to terrifying with sickening speed. Mark's pressure about finances intensified. He started bringing documents for me to sign. Complex forms related to the family business, power of attorney papers disguised as estate necessities. Just routine stuff. Sadie helped streamline things, he'd say casually, sliding a pen towards me. Each time a cold dread stopped my hand. I need my lawyer to look at these first, I'd reply, my voice firmer than I felt. His irritation became harder to conceal, flashing briefly before the mask of concern snapped back into place. Linda, meanwhile, amplified her campaign of painting me as incompetent. I learned from a concerned neighbor that Linda had been telling people I was barely coping, forgetting things, and that Buster was proving too much for my fragile state. She was laying the groundwork, justifying something. But what? The vet deception was the turning point, the moment vague suspicions solidified into cold certainty. Buster seemed unusually listless one morning, refusing his breakfast. Worried, I called our regular vet clinic to make an appointment. Mark overheard. No, Sadie, you stay put, he insisted almost too quickly. I know a great vet just across town, supposed to be excellent. Less waiting time too. I'll take him, you rest. He seemed oddly eager. Red flags waved frantically in my mind, but I was so exhausted, so worried about Buster that I let him go. He was gone for almost 4 hours. When he returned, Buster seemed drugged. His eyes were glassy, his movements sluggish. Mark waved away my concern. Just a mild sedative the vet gave him for the exam, standard procedure. Said it's a stomach bug. Gave me these. He produced a small, unlabeled bottle of pills. No paperwork, no diagnosis details, just a vague reassurance and a credit card receipt from a town I didn't recognize. Alarm bells screamed in my head. That evening, while Mark and Linda were distracted by a phone call, I examined Buster closely. He flinched when I touched behind his ear. Parting the fur, I found it, the tiny, unmistakable red mark of a recent injection. My blood ran cold. I waited until the next morning, my hands shaking, and called our actual vet. No, the receptionist confirmed, Buster wasn't brought in yesterday. We have no record of him being here for weeks. I hung up feeling sick. Mark had lied. He hadn't taken Buster for a stomach bug. He'd taken him somewhere else, had him sedated. Why? Preparing him for transport? Testing his temperament for a potential buyer? The possibilities were horrifying. The final blow landed just days later. I had a crucial therapy session, one I couldn't miss, the first time I felt ready to really talk about David. Mark and Linda practically pushed me out the door. Go, Sadie. It'll do you good. We'll hold down the fort here. Buster will be fine with us. My gut screamed no. The memory of the injection site, the lies. But I felt trapped. I needed the therapy. I told myself maybe I was overthinking. Maybe they were just clumsy helpers. I was gone for less than 2 hours. I came back to a house that felt hollowed out. The silence hit me before I even opened the door. No welcoming bark, no clicking claws. Buster? My voice cracked. Silence. I burst into the living room. Mark and Linda were there, sitting oddly close on the sofa, watching some mindless daytime TV show. They looked up, startled, but their eyes, they held a chilling lack of surprise. Sadie, Linda began, standing up slowly, twisting her hands together. There was an incident. Mark stood too, placing a hand on her arm, his face arranged into an expression of deep regret. He's gone, Sadie. The side gate. It must not have latched properly after the gardener left yesterday. He just bolted. We looked everywhere. Called his name for ages. Gone. Bolted. Buster, who wouldn't leave my side even off-leash. Buster, who was terrified of the noisy street beyond the gate. It was the flimsiest, most insulting lie yet. The gardener hadn't even been there that week. I stared at them, at their poorly feigned distress, and the last vestiges of my denial shattered. I saw the flicker of relief in Linda's eyes, the hard set of Mark's jaw beneath the performance. They hadn't looked. They hadn't called. They knew exactly where Buster was because they had orchestrated his removal. The grief I'd been drowning in suddenly ignited into pure, unadulterated rage. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had declared war. That night the house felt alien, violated. Every creak of the floorboards echoed the emptiness left by Buster. Sleep was a foreign concept. My mind raced, replaying every suspicious comment, every lie, every manipulative gesture from Mark and Linda since David's death. They hadn't just stumbled into opportunistic cruelty. This felt calculated. The way they isolated me, chipped away at my confidence, tried to gain control of my finances, and finally, removed the one creature who gave me unconditional comfort and loyalty. It was systematic. Anger pulsed through me, hot and clarifying. They saw a grieving widow, fragile and easily manipulated. They didn't see the woman David had loved, the one with a core of steel beneath the surface. And they certainly didn't know about David's final act of protection. The memory hit me like a jolt of electricity. The conversation years ago. The break glass in case of emergency fund. The hidden safe. Adrenaline surged through me. Waiting until I heard the telltale sounds of Mark and Linda settling down for the night. The click of their guest room door. The low murmur of their TV. I slipped out of bed. My heart hammered against my ribs as I crept into David's study. The familiar scent of old books and his faint cologne filled the air, strengthening my resolve. He wouldn't have stood for this. He would want me to fight. My fingers found the almost invisible seam of the false panel in the back of his closet. It clicked open silently. Behind it, the small dark gray metal safe waited. Kneeling, I entered the combination David had made me memorize, the numbers clicking softly in the stillness. Click, 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 thunk. The handle turned. Inside lay not just a thick stack of cash, far more than I'd expected, but also a slim folder containing duplicate copies of vital personal and financial documents, a brand new burner phone still in its packaging, and a single folded note in David's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. For my Sadie, if you're reading this, things are bad. Use this wisely. Find the truth. Get leverage. Stay strong. Remember how much I love you. Always, David. Tears welled hot and fierce, but they weren't tears of sorrow anymore. They were tears of empowerment, of fierce gratitude. David had foreseen the possibility of betrayal, of me being left vulnerable. He had left me the tools not just to survive but to fight back. Leverage. That was the key. The next morning, I put on my best performance of a woman utterly devastated by the loss of her dog, barely able to function. I need to get away, I choked out, avoiding Mark and Linda's faux sympathetic gazes. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. I just can't be here right now. They exchanged glances, relief thinly veiled beneath expressions of concern. Of course, Sadie Linda cooed. Take all the time you need. We'll handle things here. Handle things. I bet they would. They practically ushered me out the door, no doubt eager to have free rein of the house. They had no idea I wasn't fleeing. I was mobilizing. With the contents of the safe tucked securely in my bag, I drove not to my sister's, but to a nondescript office building downtown. I walked into the reception area of a highly recommended private investigation agency, took a deep breath and stated my purpose. My name is Sadie Miller. My husband recently passed away and his brother and sister-in-law have moved into my home. They just got rid of my therapy dog under suspicious circumstances. I need you to find out what happened to my dog. And I need you to investigate Mark and Linda Sterling. Finances, business dealings, associates, everything. My husband left me a fund specifically for this. Find the truth. The investigator listened intently, his expression serious. The game wasn't just changing. I was flipping the entire board. The PIs worked with chilling efficiency. Updates came discreetly via encrypted text to the burner phone. The first report confirmed Buster's fate within 2 days, ripping open the wound anew but solidifying my resolve. Traffic cameras, a neighbor's doorbell cam footage Mark and Linda hadn't known about, and interviews with people near the park they claimed Buster bolted from, it all painted a clear picture. Mark's car wasn't seen driving around searching. It was tracked directly to an address 2 towns over. An address known to the PIs as belonging to a notorious pet broker who specialized in flipping purebred dogs quickly, often exporting them or selling them online with falsified papers. They even got a statement from a delivery driver who saw a man matching Mark's description physically struggling to pull a distressed, whining golden retriever from his car into the broker's building that afternoon. Mark hadn't just rehomed Buster. He'd sold him like chattel, likely pocketing the few $100s while telling me my heart was breaking over a runaway. The cold-blooded callousness stole my breath. Where was Buster now? Was he scared? Confused? Alone? The thought was unbearable, but it fueled the fire. Find him if you can, I texted back to the lead PI. But prioritize Mark and Linda. Dig deeper. Follow the money. David's emergency fund, thankfully substantial, allowed the investigation to expand significantly. The PIs delved into Mark and Linda's finances, their spending habits, contrasting their flashy lifestyle. The new cars, designer clothes, expensive vacations Linda subtly posted about online, with Mark's official salary from the family construction supply company. The company David's father had started, and which David had poured time and expertise into, despite his own successful architecture career. Then the PIs hit the jackpot, buried in years of company ledgers and supplier invoices. It wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping, it was systematic fraud. Mark had been bleeding the company dry for years. Fake invoices for non-existent materials, padding expense reports, diverting inventory to sell on the side, even creating shell corporations to funnel payments. Linda was fully aware, her signature appearing on documents transferring funds to personal accounts disguised as business expenses. They weren't just capitalizing on my grief. They were seasoned criminals who had likely been defrauding their own family, including David, long before his death. A chilling thought struck me. Had David started to uncover this? He'd made some comments in the months before his accident about needing to straighten out the books at the supply company, about Mark being sloppy. Was it possible? The PIs couldn't find direct evidence linking them to David's death, but the motive was suddenly glaringly obvious. If David found out, their gravy train would end, possibly with jail time. The money from selling Buster? It was probably insignificant to them, maybe covering a credit card bill or funding a weekend trip while I wept at home. The PIs meticulously compiled bank statements, email chains discussing the transfers, testimony from a disgruntled former employee Mark had fired suspiciously. It was all there. Concrete, undeniable proof. David hadn't just left me cash, he'd left me an arsenal. The PIs found a potential lead on Buster too. The broker had likely sold him quickly to an out-of-state buyer. Finding him would be harder but possible. First, though, came justice for Mark and Linda. I just needed the right setting for the reveal. Linda, in her infinite capacity for tone-deaf arrogance, provided the perfect stage. She decided, without much consultation with me, to host a celebration of David's life at my house about a month after his death. Just intimate, she declared, close family, dearest friends. A chance for us all to share memories and support Sadie. Support Sadie. The irony was acidic. They planned to use my home, my husband's memory, and my grief as props in their ongoing performance of devoted family members, all while sitting on their pile of stolen money and secrets. It was grotesque. It was perfect. That sounds thoughtful, Linda, I managed to say, playing the part of the fragile widow still leaning on their strength. Inside, a cold fire burned. Let them gather the audience. I would provide the fireworks. I spent the days leading up to the gathering meticulously reviewing the PI's dossier, highlighting key evidence, making multiple copies of the most damning summaries. I briefed the lead investigator. Be nearby, be ready. On my signal, the full file goes to the authorities. The day itself was heavy and gray, the weather matching the somber farce Mark and Linda intended. Guests arrived. David's heartbroken parents, his aunts and uncles, cousins who had always been slightly wary of Mark, a few of David and my closest friends who knew Mark and Linda primarily through us. Mark and Linda were consummate hosts, gliding through the room with practiced sorrow, offering drinks, guiding people to the buffet Linda had catered. They treated me with exaggerated gentleness, patting my arm, whispering things like, "You're being so strong, Sadie," loud enough for others to hear. I let them play their parts, nodding mutely, my heart a steady drumbeat of adrenaline beneath my black dress. I clutched a simple manila folder, my script for the final act. After an hour or so, when the subdued mingling lulled, Mark stepped forward, clearing his throat to command attention. If I could have everyone's attention for a moment, he began, puffing up slightly. Linda and I wanted to say a few words about David and about how much it means to have you all here supporting Sadie. This was it. Before he could launch into his hypocritical eulogy, I stood up. My movement was small, but it silenced the room. Mark, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet, clearer and stronger than anyone expected, especially them. Thank you. But before you continue, there's something I need to say. Every head turned towards me. Mark looked startled, then annoyed. Linda's smile froze. Sadie, Mark said, his tone laced with condescending concern. Maybe this isn't the best time. You're emotional. Oh, I assure you, Mark, I've never felt clearer, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. The air crackled. I wanted to publicly thank you and Linda for everything you've done since David died. Sarcasm dripped from the words, though my expression remained neutral. Especially your handling of Buster. The name landed like a stone in the quiet room. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. David's mother frowned, confused. Mark licked his lips nervously. Linda visibly paled. We know how devastating his running away was for you, Linda murmured, trying to steer the narrative back to their script. Running away. I repeated the phrase, letting disbelief color my tone. Is that the official story now? Because I seem to recall you also suggesting he was rehomed for my own good, Linda. Because I was too overwhelmed. I saw realization dawning on the faces of some friends who Linda had fed that lie to. Mark stepped forward slightly. Sadie, you're distraught. You're twisting things. I held up the manila folder. Because when my dog disappeared, I didn't just grieve. I got angry. And I got help. Professional help. Private investigators. Mark and Linda exchanged panicked glances. They were very thorough. They found out you didn't look for Buster at all, Mark. They found out you sedated him at a vet clinic you lied about, then drove him 2 towns over and sold him. Sold my therapy dog, my last link to David, like he was a piece of trash while I was at a therapy session you insisted I attend. A collective gasp went through the room. David's father surged to his feet, his face thunderous. Mark, what is she talking about? Mark stammered, flustered. It's not true. She's confused, Dad. But the investigators didn't stop there, I continued, my voice ringing with cold fury, overriding his pathetic attempts at denial. I opened the folder. You see, David left me something. A safety net. Resources. He knew, maybe he knew you. Because these investigators looked into everything. I locked eyes with Mark, then Linda, savoring the sheer terror blooming on their faces. They looked into the family business, Mark. The one David poured his heart and soul into helping build. I started handing out copies of the summary sheet. The one detailing years of embezzlement, inflated expenses, dummy corporations, offshore accounts. Turns out you two have been systematically robbing this family blind for years. Funding your entire lifestyle with stolen money. Betraying David. Betraying his parents. Betraying everyone in this room. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rustling of paper as horrified family members scanned the evidence. Linda let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. Mark stood rooted to the spot, his face a grotesque mixture of crimson rage and stark white fear. David's mother began to weep silently. His father stared at the paper, then at Mark, his expression one of utter devastation and contempt. My own son, he whispered, the words heavy with betrayal. Mark opened and closed his mouth like a landed fish, no sound coming out. Their carefully constructed world, built on lies and theft, had just imploded. Watching their masks of respectability disintegrate under the weight of the truth, seeing the judgment and disgust in the eyes of the people they'd deceived, that was my revenge. Quietly, unnoticed in the ensuing chaos of accusations and tears, I pulled out the burner phone and sent a single text. Now. Outside, unseen, the wheels of justice began to turn. The arrival of the police, though discreet, shattered the remaining composure in the room. Mark and Linda offered no real resistance. The fight had gone out of them the moment the financial evidence came to light. Watching them being quietly escorted out of my house, past the stunned and betrayed faces of their family, felt like lancing a wound. It was painful, ugly, but necessary for healing to begin. The gathering broke up in a state of shock and confusion, leaving me standing in the sudden echoing quiet of my home. This time the silence felt different, earned clean. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. Faced with the mountain of evidence meticulously gathered by the PIs, bank records, emails, witness statements, Mark and Linda had little defense. Mark, as the primary architect of the long-term embezzlement scheme, received a substantial prison sentence. The court recognized the calculated nature of the fraud and the betrayal of trust involved. Linda, though claiming ignorance initially, was proven to be complicit. Her signature on key documents and evidence of shared spending sealed her fate. She avoided prison but received several years of probation, crippling financial penalties that wiped out their stolen assets, and perhaps worst of all for her, complete social and familial exile. David's parents, though heartbroken by their son's actions, supported the legal process fully, determined to salvage what was left of the family business's integrity. It was a long and painful process of audits and restructuring, but the company survived, finally free from Mark's parasitic presence. And Buster? The PIs, continuing their search with the resources David had provided, eventually located him. He had been sold through a series of brokers and ended up with a loving family in a neighboring state. They had adopted him in good faith, unaware of his traumatic journey. The investigators made contact, explaining the situation sensitively. The family was appalled and immediately offered to return him to me. I wrestled with the decision. My heart ached to have him back, to feel his familiar weight leaning against me. But the PI sent photos. Buster playing joyfully with 2 young children, sleeping peacefully on their sofa, looking healthy and genuinely happy. Uprooting him again, tearing him away from a stable, loving environment he had clearly adapted to, felt selfish. With a heavy heart, I made the difficult choice to let him stay where he was thriving. Knowing he was safe, loved, and well cared for had to be enough. It was a final, painful letting go, but it felt like the right thing for him. Life didn't instantly become easy. Grief doesn't follow a timeline, and the scars from Mark and Linda's betrayal run deep. But reclaiming the truth, exposing their darkness, and seeing justice prevail brought a profound sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. David's foresight, his emergency fund, had been more than just money. It was a lifeline, a final act of love that empowered me to fight back when I felt utterly broken. Slowly, day by day, I started to rebuild. I threw myself into my design work, finding solace in creation. I reconnected with friends who had proven their loyalty. I started hiking again, finding strength in nature's quiet resilience. My house began to feel like home again, filled not with the ghosts of what I'd lost or the specter of betrayal, but with cherished memories of David and the surprising discovery of my own strength. Mark and Linda tried to extinguish my light during my darkest time, but they only succeeded in igniting a fire within me. They underestimated the grieving widow. They underestimated David's enduring protection. And they learned far too late that true strength isn't about manipulation or deceit. It's about enduring, fighting for what's right, and finding your way back to the light, even after unimaginable loss.